Welcome everybody to this UKAA webinar, one of our regular Tuesday morning slots. And my name's Amanda Keane and I work for UKAA, look after the membership. What's different about this webinar is that we've actually got well over 200 people registered, so it's a bit of a record breaker for us. And considering that it was originally just going to be a round table, we would have needed a very big table for that. So we're absolutely delighted with the participation. Thanks to everybody for registering. Another unusual aspect of this webinar is it's been put together by our Northwest Hub. We have a committee up there running all our activities in the region, and they have a whole programme of events planned. The next one, key one in the diary, apart from a barbecue in the summer, is a study tour in Leeds. Very topical at the moment after UK Reef last week, but if you want to note a date in your diary, 20th and 21st of September, we will have a study tour. I would like now, having waffled along as we wait for people to arrive, to hand over to our chair for this event, Vicky Hercombe, who's Marketing Director at Sigma Capital Group. And I'd also like to thank Sigma for sponsoring this webinar. So appreciate the panel's time. Thanks everyone for joining, and over to you, Vicky.
Well, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, so I think, I'm not sure if Amanda mentioned, but we are going to do a bit of a Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions throughout this, just pop them in the should have a question box there. If you want us to get back, if we don't end up getting through all of them in time, then feel free to pop your name on there as well, and we can try and get back to you after the webinar with some answers. Depending on time. I know with the UKAA tour that we last did in Manchester, there was quite a lot of questions around single family housing and operations. Hopefully we can get to answer some of those today between us. So we'll start with introductions. I'm Vicky Hercombe, Marketing Director at Sigma Capital, which is the Simple Life brand, which is our build to rent brand, if you've heard of that. We're the leading provider in single family housing build to rent, with about 5,500 properties completed to date. So basically I look after all of the marketing, particularly the customer experience, alongside my colleague Luke. As well as the PRS PLC corporate brand, and also obviously the Sigma corporate brand. So I think I'll pass on to each of the other panelists just to kind of give an intro to who they are, where they work, and a little bit about sort of their job role. So Luke, do you want to start us off?
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks, UKAA, for inviting me to this. We're looking forward to getting into the nitty gritty. So my name's Luke Lightfoot. I'm the Regional Director of Asset Management for Sigma Capital. As Vicky's already said, we operate under the brand Simple Life and also Simple Life London. My job is to oversee multiple funds in the regions and in London as well. So I generally oversee the operational side of things for Sigma. It's my job to really find efficiencies in the OPEXs, and it's also my job to reduce any leakages there in the gross to net and maximise the returns for our investors. Thank you.
Sorry, Giovanni, do you want to go next?
Yes, no worries. Hi everyone, so I'm Giovanni. So I work in CBRE's residential capital markets team based in Manchester. So we advise investors and developers across the board on residential investment transactions. So I come at this from effectively an advisory or agency capacity. As a business, we've been very active in the single family housing market. Just recently, a few years back, we were involved in one of the UK's first fully stabilised income producing single family housing portfolio sale, which was Project Thistle on behalf of Gatehouse Bank, which was a 900 unit portfolio across the Northwest. So yeah, thanks for bringing me on today. Glad to be here.
Well, Graham.
Good morning. I'm Graham Mill. I'm head of design at Place First. We're a leading build to rent and regeneration specialist with a fast growing portfolio of over 1,500 homes throughout the UK. I lead the design process on all projects from concept through to completion with teams of external architects, consultants, and an in-house team of design managers.
Perfect, thank you. Georgia?
Hello, thank you for the invitation. My name's Georgia. I'm head of Grainger Trust at Grainger, and Grainger is the UK's largest listed residential landlord. Grainger Trust is a wholly owned subsidiary. It's a for-profit registered provider of affordable housing. I'm also responsible for portfolios of single family housing, private rent in the same locations. So I look after about 1,200 units across London and the South East, and I'm responsible for operational, strategic and regulatory matters.
Perfect, thank you. And Will?
Hi guys, yeah, for those who saw the advert, obviously not John Ivory, so sorry to disappoint, but I'm Will Skuse. I work at Package Living with John. So Package Living, we are sort of, we sort of have a various strategies under the build to rent umbrella, but one of which is a single family housing strategy, for which we have a joint venture with Aviva Investors, deploying capital into forward funding house builders and sort of building a platform. We're about 2.5 years into the sort of single family journey. So a little bit, behind our friends at Sigma and Place First, etc. But trying to play catch up. We've got something like 700 units sort of under contracts and over 1,000 sort of in legals at the moment. So really trying to ramp things up, and we have our first operational units actually come online at Telford. So that's kind of where we are. And so I should add, so just to be my role, sort of it's investment team focus, so it's sort of origination, underwriting, execution sort of things.
Okay, perfect. So we've got quite a lot of different expertise and roles and backgrounds on the call. So the topics that we're covering are quite broad, but hopefully what we did want to do between us as a committee in the Northwest, what we wanted to do is try and cover some new ground and answer some kind of slightly different questions. So hopefully we'll do that today. So first of all, probably quite an obvious one, but I think it's just worth us just defining for the benefit of people watching what we're actually talking about when we say single family build to rent housing, particularly in regards to, I suppose, where's the line drawn between single family housing and multifamily, by sort of, is that property type or is that by location? So if anyone's got any sort of thoughts on that to give us a bit of an intro.
Yeah, I'll go there, Vic. I think in terms of the BTR single family homes, I think the terms are American. So that's been brought from overseas, and basically how we see it at Sigma, it's basically one family under one roof for single family homes, and then multifamily is apartment blocks. That's how we would see it with Sigma.
Any differences on that?
Yeah, no, agree. And I think what's key from our perspective is, it's I guess mainly traditional housing led, but in single ownership across a single site, providing potential tenants with access to quality, well specified housing with strong ESG credentials, but all wrapped within a professional management solution.
Yeah, agree with that.
Yeah, I think to Luke's point, I'm not really sure when it sort of crept in, the American terminology, in terms of the differential between the two, because I sort of, obviously it sits under the build to rent umbrella, but it feels like in the last year, 18 months, there's been a clear kind of divide in actually how we define it, and strategy is kind of focused on each. So yeah, I mean, obviously there are specifics to each, and I think you're right. Generally, it's one single family is a house, and there's a one family living in it, and multifamily typically multiple families. So sharers, I think, is sort of the core demographic there, or couples. There's obviously overlap, so you're always going to have sharers in single family schemes. You're going to have families living in multifamily schemes, but that's kind of typically where they're getting their name from.
Yeah.
I totally agree with all of those definitions. I think often you'd assume it's houses as opposed to apartments, and often it would be assumed to be in a more suburban setting rather than an urban setting. But I do think that the lines are a bit blurred there. We often develop single family housing in an urban context as a way of bringing bringing families back into town centres and regenerating them. So yeah, but you know, in simple terms, one family under one roof.
Yeah.
It's fair to say we do have some blocks of apartments in what I would consider single family housing in suburban areas, but I think that the main difference is, because Grainger does both and is ostensibly a sort of city centre build to rent focused business, but the key differences really boil down to density and amenity. So you might have a large built to rent block in a city centre, and you're going to have that on-site concierge ideally, and like community facilities, kitchens, cinema rooms, etc. Single family housing, usually out in a more suburban area. What amenity is there is usually more focused on outside areas, and it's sort of targeted at people who might be graduating from city centre build to rent, having started their family and moved out to the suburbs.
Yeah, perfect. So for the purpose of today, we'll be focusing more on obviously the housing sort of part of single family, as opposed to sort of apartment schemes, particularly from an operational point of view, because I think that's where you can see your clear differences. So going on to sort of more kind of investor appetite then, I know Joe will have a lot to say on this. So obviously we've seen quite a huge shift of attention, I think, for single family housing built to rent since COVID, particularly as obviously there was a huge demand, people were moving out of city centres, perhaps the all-inclusive amenity wasn't so important at that point because they weren't necessarily able to use them. And I suppose from our point of view in particular, we really felt that at that point a lot of our customers started to really value and understand the difference between renting with a build to rent landlord as opposed to a one-off private landlord, purely because of the security of tenure, and they weren't going to be kicked out any second soon. So that was quite a big turning point, and since then there seems to be a lot more funds that have been sort of launched, focused on single family housing. So at the moment, where are we? Can someone give me sort of an overview of where we're at now? So where is the funding coming from, and what's the investor appetite now for single family build to rent?
Should I kick off? Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, it's the sector's got quite a lot of attention from investors, and it's on a fairly rapid growth trajectory going forward. You know, I think over the years, single family housing, you know, it's been confined to I guess a handful of transactions in comparison to sort of the overall residential spectrum. I think last year it was around 7% of total residential investment, but this is developing, and you know, there's various reasons for that in terms of barriers to entry and the events last year, but you know, this is developing, and there's now a huge wall of capital targeting the subsector. So, you know, as an investment agent running a process, the field of investors has widened. You know, we've identified, you know, at least 40 investors who are wanting to deliver single family housing in the next 5 years. You know, over £8 billion worth of capital that's committed to delivering single family. And already this year, we've seen nearly £400 million worth of investment into the subsector, which was, you know, the largest in Q1. So that was the largest recorded quarterly figure for single family, and was around a quarter of all residential investment transactions. And that figure it exceeds the full 2022 investment figure, which is fairly substantial. And you know, initially we saw investors targeting the sector, you know, looking for a large sort of discount to vacant possession value, typically sort of private equity investors, where the upside was selling to the open market and realizing a fairly swift profit on individual houses. But this has changed massively. You know, the capital pool has got a lot deeper. We're seeing interest now from more core longer term investors, such as, you know, Packaged Living, Aviva, who is on this call, who've got a much lower cost of capital than you know, a lower cost of capital, targeting the sector, focusing on longer term inflationary linked secure income. I think, you know, that's sort of generally speaking. I think more recently, in terms of what we're seeing in the market, is, you know, those investors being more active as a result of the elevated cost of debt remaining a slight challenge for investors who are more highly geared. we saw a live example last year. We recently acted for, live example more recently, we recently acted for package living on a portfolio down in the southeast. It was previously under offer to private equity backed investor, and as a result of pressures on debt costs, the return profile for that particular investor became less attractive, which presented an opportunity for package living. So there's a more opportunity for those type of investors. So yeah, it's quite interesting in terms of that pool of investor that's widened quite substantially.
Yeah,
I think the market is, oh, sorry, go on, Will.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, yeah, just to jump in, I think obviously Gio's referencing our recent deal, which is good to get the kind of press out there. But I think in terms of the market, it's been kind of nuts, because you've had single family's been being talked about for a long time, and obviously, as sort of previously alluded, kind of the likes of Sigma and Place First have sort of been, kind of ticking away, sort of tucking away deals with Countryside, Vistry, and developing yourselves for some years now, and have built quite big portfolios. But it was probably off the back of the Project Thistle transaction that Gio referenced. So the Goldman Sachs purchase of the Gatehouse Bank portfolio circa 21, and it felt like from then we've kind of had these compressed market cycles for single family build to rent, sort of accelerated by a number of things. So obviously, kind of COVID, the move to the suburbs, the relative defensive nature of sort of residential asset classes versus other commercial asset classes has seen kind of that massively accelerate. So we got to the point last year where the market was incredibly hot. Like it was, that house price inflation was strong. So house builders didn't need to sell to us. They kind of would only sell if they would be getting a suitably attractive price for them. And you had funds, including some, pretty substantial, pretty high cost of capital, but quite sophisticated capital, sort of, climbing over each other to try and get deals done. And within that, you had, big aggregators. So people were making plays. They weren't sort of, it wasn't sort of a, slowly sort of accruing, just building a scheme over time. It was a play of, you've got a window now where you can get in on these deals, where you can see where rental growth is going, you can kind of see where yield compression, the direction of travel is looking, and you can build these big platforms, big portfolios, and then stabilize them. And that was, you called it Goldman Sachs model really, and they were the sort of front runners, but there are others doing it. So the market got incredibly hot, kind of almost ridiculously so, I'd say, kind of back end of last summer. Then we obviously had debt costs moved out, that started to push out anyway. Mini budget, kind of trust quarting sort of came through. And off the back of that, you almost kind of felt that the market had blown up. So you kind of had, you had peak to trough pretty quickly. And then actually, I think off the back of mini budget, build to rent, but particularly single family seemed to have stabilized much quicker as well. So, we kind of came off that period between September and December where there wasn't a huge amount going on. There's a few deals going through that were sort of previously under offer, and people kind of, trying to get stuff done, albeit kind of understand there was a bit of a repricing across the market. But then you kind of come into Q1 this year, and I think I saw some stat in one of the JLL reports that of the build to rent investment in Q1, over half was single family, which obviously when you consider where we come from, that's a pretty staggering statistic. So obviously, there's some big transactions in there which might skew it slightly, but it feels like you've got this kind of, this market which is moving incredibly quickly. And kind of to Gio's point now, you're kind of at the stage now, you've got kind of more, it's almost more core capital, because the leverage purchases, it is become harder. So you've got more kind of core capital, and you've got, from what we understand, you kind of, talking to agents and understanding what various deals are going on, you've got quite a few new pots of capital coming into play. So it's kind of, it's an interesting dynamic that's moving quickly. But yeah, it all seems to be massively accelerated. So yeah, we're quite interested to see. And I think, to the kind of, with the house bill as well, I talked about the house price inflation, obviously increased mortgage costs, pressure on sales prices has kind of brought more of them to the table. So there's actually more access to stock now than there was previously. I won't ramble on too long. I'll let someone else jump in as well.
I think the appetite, obviously the market's not particularly mature yet, but I think it's growing traction because people see the value. It provides for a growing demographic of people who either choose to or are relying on the private rental sector to meet their housing needs. so we're fortunate Place First is fully funded by UK private equity, but there just seems to be a huge amount of interest out there from investors.
Yeah, so totally agree with that, Graham. So the Gatehouse transaction and Thistle, well, we managed it and packaged that up. We also managed another portfolio for Gatehouse as well, UKPRS. I think that did highlight that it is its own asset class now, and that was a really hot deal to be had. I think COVID just in general has just it's changed how people look at the asset class itself. People want to be outside, people want a garden, people want their own home to rent and live in. And I think that's just really highlighted, as opposed to your multifamily apartment block schemes, that there's a definite need for it. It's customers' kind of wants and desires to live in their own home, which is not going to be taken from under them and professionally managed. And that's where operators like ourselves have come forward and said, yeah, we can facilitate that with our build partners, or we can build them out ourselves with our own land bank. And that's where it's come from, really. And I think what Will was alluding to, that there's a lot of deals around at the minute where there's existing stock on housing sites, as we know, hard to get a mortgage these days, cost of debt, etc. The house builders have continued to build, but they cannot sell them. So there's a lot of deals coming forward with ourselves that we're seeing from existing partners and new partners as well, basically saying, look, we've got 20, 30 units left on the end of this site. Some of them are at a part built through, some of them are at the first fixed stage. Do you want to do a deal on this? I mean, for ourselves in Sigma, if it's an existing partner and we can get the spec to match our usual brand spec, it's an absolute no-brainer. If we're working with the partner, we can get the deal done, we can deploy the capital, and we can add it to our management reach. And that's where these deals are definitely coming forward thick and fast, I would say. And that's just one little bit of it, but there's also bigger deals going on in the background as well, where you've got existing partnerships and there is a full site there to go. But I'll definitely think now there's a lot more mixed tenure deals coming forward where there's different people on the site. So for sale, someone like a Sigma private for rent, and then housing association, they seem to be the way forward these days to get the density and the scale done.
Yeah, definitely. I know when we had our sort of like pre-call catch up, this was kind of quite a big topic actually, in terms of this seems to be where quite a lot of supply opportunities are coming in, but there was quite a lot of discussion as whether that's actually an opportunity, or is that actually quite a challenge. I know there were some differences of opinion across the board here. Graham, what's your take on those sort of deals that are potentially coming forward?
Yeah, I mean, our supply mostly comes from organic land-led development, and that will continue to be the case as we move forward, often through partnerships with local authorities to meet their housing demand and regeneration aspirations. But we are seeing a lot more of what Luke mentioned there, these land-led opportunities, partnerships with house builders and the like. And I think it is a good opportunity to grow your portfolio quickly, but we do have to be very selective, as there's a risk that it can dilute your brand if it's not done carefully. So firstly, I think the opportunity needs to be of sufficient scale to give you the critical mass that you need to effectively manage a site. Typically, we won't look at anything less than, say, 50 units. We don't want the build to rent plots to be too pepper potted around the site if it is mixed tenure. So we can take control of the management and maintenance of the public and shared spaces. And also we need to heavily input on the specification and where possible, the external appearance of the buildings as well. I think it'll be interesting to see whether these opportunities gradually disappear as the sales market picks up, or as house builders start to diversify and perhaps even offer their own build to rent model. But on the whole, if it's, we're seeing lots of these opportunities, a handful every week, and if we can get them right, then they are good opportunities.
Yeah, And I think we're referencing those conversations with potential, I guess, house builders who have a large land bank, where there may be a struggle of selling a few units on a particular site. I think you could see that as two things. It's a solution to potentially acquiring opportunities or getting to the scale required, but it can often pose a bit of a challenge. Often what we're seeing is available opportunities are house builder sites where they might be partway through construction. Some of the units might be pepper potted around several sites, not particularly the right makeup of unit typology, larger units, not in line with the sort of what you would typically class as a better yielding build to rent product, and the sort of capital that's targeting the market is not necessarily able to align their returns and requirements with that type of product, particularly operationally when you're looking at these things over a longer term. So yes, we are seeing more opportunity and potentially more, I guess, supply for investors in that regard. The challenge is aligning that type of product with truly what investors are trying to acquire and operate over the longer term. Yeah.
I think from my point of view as well, from the sort of customer experience point of view, it's much harder to build a build to rent community feel when there's obviously there's fewer number of units. So I know Will mentioned sort of 50 units, but is there sort of a sweet spot of a kind of number of units that we'd be looking for on development single family? Is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I might jump in if that's all right. So I think it's massive, depends on the model. So to what the guys are saying, like there's a lot of these sort of, at risk of sounding rude, sort of fag ends of sites that house builders are trying to sell just to kind of get offside. And I think if that's the model, I think there's a lot of good opportunities in that space to buy them at quite good pricing. For us, that's just not what we're going for. We're more aligned with kind of what everyone's mentioning about sort of a community. So you want to be building a community. You want to have ideally sort of your own parcel of PRS without too much pepper potting. I think for us, it's probably 75 units. I think if you'd asked us 6 months ago, it's probably 50, but I think that's gone up. Just as you get more into detail around kind of the operating efficiencies and how you actually make those schemes kind of work and stack up from an OpEx perspective. So yeah, it's probably 75 up to 250, and then the ceiling on it is kind of dependent on the location and the depth of demand that you're looking at. But yeah, I definitely think you probably have a divergence in the market, because there will be plenty of investors out there. I know there are some that are looking at 15 units here, kind of pepper potted units there and there, but it's just a split in terms of the various models that you're working with.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Will. It's 75 plus to make it work, essentially. When we're talking about the pepper pottedness and getting let's just call them the fag ends of some sites, if you have an existing partnership model there where you already have numbers on that site, for instance, or you have a site up the road and it's within your management reach, that can work. It all comes down to what Graham was saying. The specification needs to match the brand. What can you do? Is there a halfway house there to make sure that it does match? And can it be managed, and are the returns there? So Sigma are looking at all of that, and it certainly does work if we do have a site which is already in build. We've got some units on there that we've done a deal for. There's another 10, 15 units on there we can add it to, because it's definitely within the reach.
Yeah. And I suppose this is a question for Gio that I've sort of thrown in there sneakily. Then this is more of a personal question from me, really, because I've seen so many articles, so many new funds kind of being announced over the last sort of 12 months. And it kind of feels like there's a lot being announced, but then actually I've not seen a lot come into fruition. Is it a fair assessment to say that actually there's a bit of a balance to strike with not being too choosy as well? Because actually then are we seeing funds struggling to deploy the capital quick enough for it to actually get off the ground and work? Is that something that we're seeing, or?
Yeah, no, take your point. I wouldn't particularly say that funds are being too choosy about the opportunities. I think it's generally down to the main challenges in accessing the sector. So, firstly, we've referenced the more sort of core capital targeting single ownership sites of 75 units plus. That means the developer has to firstly have that exit strategy in mind to align their sales with or exit strategy with an incoming investor. That developer is competing in an environment against a national house builder. And for that particular developer to build as efficiently or as cost effective as a house builder who have a much greater control over their supply chains is going to be very difficult. So when we speak to our land teams, the majority of land sales that they are in the market with, top of the sort of list in terms of most competitive pricing is from national house builders who typically would then execute their exit strategy view through owner-occupier sales. So I guess trying to actually access the right site with the right developer, I think Will would probably agree that it's not always the easiest task. So physical ability to secure sites. I think secondly as well, yes, there have been a lot of funds that have been raised to the sector, but similar instance to the multifamily sector, when we were at an early stage of multifamily, trying to get under the skin of the data and getting into a nascent market is difficult to provide that conviction to an investment committee to truly get something over the line. I think in multifamily, it was a lot easier where you're in a city centre environment with competing new build buy-to-let stock. You understand the demographic, you understand the employment prospects of prime regional cities. In a suburban market, single family, it's a lot more granular. And yes, we are able to lean on the likes of what Sigma are doing operationally, but trying to get under the skin of that just takes that little bit longer, I suspect, for majority of the market. But again, I think that will come in time, and then we'll start to see a bit more sort of deals that come to fruition as a result.
Yeah, and we definitely see that throughout our portfolio. We're never kind of 100% spot on, because sometimes we might look at some sites and we think, oh, they'll absolutely fly, and maybe they don't as much, and it is so different site by site. And obviously it's not as big a block, so it's a harder challenge because of resource and spreading yourself across multiple different sites as well. But I think our relationship with house builders over time has really helped us to achieve the scale that we have, and it is about knowing each other really well, and it is about kind of it comes really easy now to both know what to expect of each other. So when those sort of are aligned, that sort of really helps. Luke, have you got anything to say on house builder relationships at all? Or
no, I think you're bang on there, Vicky. It does depend on your relationships. There's a lot of new players in the market bidding for sites and winning them, but when it comes down to getting the legals over the line, it kind of falls away from that point. We've seen we do bid on some sites, as everybody does, and we do find house builders and partners coming back to us with the deal, and we're winning it secondary sometimes. And it's just based on the partnership that we have. We can very quickly get a deal done. We can very quickly deploy the capital, and all the legal side of things are swift and easy. I think it is hard for new guys coming in, just having that ready to go. I think it's all right getting a deal agreed, but it's actually doing on the back end and actually physically doing it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Luke. It's one of those where agreeing your first funding agreement with a new partner it's a pain. It's quite painful to get through at times. So once you've done that and you've got a suite of documents you can roll out, you've got an understanding on specification, on scheme requirements, scale, unit types, etc. Just makes things a lot easier. So I think, again, further down the track with this, but in terms of the business model, it's very much about repeat business. It's about having kind of a core group of, kind of house builders, but partners ultimately that you're delivering houses with, that you can do, you're not doing 1, 2, 3, you're kind of doing 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of deals into the future with, and that's kind of, from our perspective, that's kind of where we're working towards and we're trying to get to. So definitely feels like the most efficient way to get into the market and kind of create scale.
Yeah. I'm going to move us on a little bit here. We've got quite a lot still to cover. ESG. So in regards to ESG at the moment, what are the ESG implications for particularly retrofitting legacy housing? And are we finding that investors have an appetite for ESG for single housing developments? Graham, do you want to kick us off, because you're probably for legacy housing?
Yeah, I think ESG is personal to every business. Place First has an amazing track record of refurbishment, which is in itself highly sustainable. We retained 93% of the homes at Welsh Streets in Liverpool, and we've calculated that there's a 36% saving in carbon for every house that wasn't demolished. Our refurbishment process goes a long way in improving the performance of properties. A new boiler, loft insulation, double glazing, that can all have a big impact on the EPC rating, but we often try and take it beyond that if we can. I think the government's focus has definitely shifted towards the health of the current housing stock. House building only adds about 0.7% to the UK's stock every year. And 80% of the current housing stock will still be there in 2050 when we're expected to hit the government's decarbonisation target. So for old housing stock, the changes to MEES, the minimum energy efficiency standards, I think that'll make it really difficult for a lot of buy-to-let landlords. Something like 47% of the UK's housing is EPC D. And there's plenty of stock at E, F and G. So achieving a minimum EPC of C for new lets from 2028 will require a huge amount of investment that institutional landlords are far more capable of implementing. But we do mostly specialise in new builds. All our new builds are designed to EPC B. We take a fabric first approach to maximise thermal efficiency, and the grid's expected to be decarbonised by 2040. So we've removed gas as a primary energy source as part of our shift towards electrification. We apply air source heat pumps for domestic hot water. All our new homes have solar PV to generate renewable energy. We're always exploring new technologies and innovations, but we also have to be aware that our customers aren't guinea pigs. These are people's homes. Everyone wants a stress-free life and a stress-free home. And with soaring energy costs, I think affordability and financial stability is very important. So we make ESG work for the people in the home, and we educate them on how to use their home in the most economical way.
Just on the ESG point, I think from an investor point of view and funder, it's non-negotiable now. It's been a hot topic for a number of years, and the ESG point sits right into the single family housing model, really, in my opinion. The technology side of things, what Graham's talking about there, I think it's changing so frequently. It's what do you pump your money in, and that's the question. Of course, we know there's going to be no gas boilers, and there's going to be immersion heaters. There's going to be a whole raft of things that are being trialed and piloted. But it's when you're doing your conversions, and Graham will know this, is what do you actually invest in, and how long is that going to last? And ultimately, these guys who do software packages, etc., they're going to be around for the next 10, 15 years, or is it just a bit of a fad? I think from a Sigma point of view, we've got it easier than Graham does, because as we're all new build and we are EPCB, so we don't have to worry about any of that. But that's not to say that we don't need to retrofit to keep up with the market. a lot of the stuff for ourselves, because of when we come into purchasing the sites with the developer, we've already got planning permission, etc. So we can't really change things. So we are planning led on a lot of them, but we are looking at strategies to actually retrofit some items within some of our existing stock. And it all comes back to buy-in from the fund, buy-in from the investors, and actually using that CapEx money and making it better for the end user, really. And there's a lot to do with that, because investors are up for it, but as soon as you put a figure in front of some people, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that's going to impact the returns to the shareholders. So that's, from an operational point of view, that's difficult. But like I said, Sigma are in a good position at this point in time, because they're all relative to new builds, but it is planning dictated at this point for us.
As Luke says, we're also all new builds, all EPCB. But I think that because timelines are getting so tight now with the minimum energy standards and the ban on gas boilers, etc., it's kind of moved from a question of investor preference, investor appetite, into a regulatory and asset management risk that needs to be planned for and budgeted for. So it really has got to the it has to happen stage, I think. And from the residents' point of view, lower energy and lower household running costs, etc., will increase retention, and we do what we can to share like greener living tips, and we're also collecting a lot of data where we can. GDPR makes it tricky around household usage, etc., so that we can further help them. A green feeling, if they feel like they live with a landlord that's helping them to reduce their own carbon footprint, etc. All of that helps retention, but that gets balanced against rent, and the rent still has to be right.
Yeah, that's kind of something that I was going to ask as well. So are we seeing them, because obviously you'd think that with the addition of all of these ESG sustainable sort of features, actually then that might have an impact on some of the rents. Are we seeing that therefore residents are also perceiving that benefit, and therefore they are happy to pay a slightly higher rent for those things? Is there an appetite there from a resident point of view as well?
I think perhaps for the residents as well as the investors, it could be moving towards expectation, especially if you are with a professional landlord in a new build property. They are expecting the properties to be energy efficient, to be magically impervious to damp and mold, etc. And we all know it's not quite that easy.
I think also it's too early in the market cycle to tell that. So in terms of sort of, properly green products, so, kind of coming off gas, strong EPC ratings, PV, battery storage, all those kind of things, which we're sort of looking to deliver within our portfolio. You don't have enough operational evidence to say, yes, you get a premium for it and what that is in a quantifiable amount. I think kind of, from our perspective, you're not underwriting it, but you are sort of hoping that it does come through. I think there's a very small number of kind of, probably slightly more ESG focused developers doing small developments. I can't remember if I was talking to someone recently who they said there's development, and they did half of the homes were sort of, there's only 10, 15 houses, half of them were kind of super duper green, zero bills, zero carbon product. And there was actually a pretty significant premium from one to the other. So obviously that's, a very small sample size, and we're going to see what the market does as things mature. But I think, the theory at least is the kind of George's point, is going to become an expectation. So it's not just whether there's a premium, it's almost whether the discount for not having all of that, both in terms of rents, but also in terms of, ultimate sort of investment value down the back end.
Yeah, and we did our own sort of market research report last year that we released early this year, and it was to renters across the UK, so not simple life residents. And to be honest, obviously it was prime sort of cost of living, and every question in the focus groups that you asked them, no matter what question it was, they always came back to cost, and particularly on the ESG points, it was very much a self-beneficial sort of kind of preference. So if it's saving them money, then yeah, they're all for it. But as soon as it might be something that's sort of a sustainable addition, which actually they think, well, that could increase the cost for me, then they weren't interested. So I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how that might change. But I definitely agree. I think it's probably becoming more of a sort of a necessity and a standard, really, as opposed to a nice to have. So just moving then on to amenity. I know, Georgia, you mentioned a little bit earlier about amenity and how that's very different on a single family housing development. So from your point of view, how is amenity kind of delivered on single family housing built to rent?
So I think I need to go back and just explain a little bit about how we've done it, because it is coming from a slightly different angle than we've perhaps mentioned so far. Grainger actually did the master plan on 2 sites in Hampshire that are just absolutely enormous, totaling over like 6,000 homes between them. And Grainger either bought the land or entered a JV with the landowner. And what they're doing is laying the infrastructure to sites, selling that off to house builders, contracting to purchase back the affordable provision. And then they've also master planned in there to suit themselves some single family housing, we call it PRS, phases within the development as a whole. So all of the amenity is being captured and thought about up front. We've got like 2 schools that are being built on each site, like food and beverage, doctors' surgeries, like it's all going in there. Lots of open spaces, lots of parks, etc. And the beauty of this approach is that by controlling the standard and management of the affordable housing, and in our example, it's completely pepper potted, all totally tenure blind, plus we've got the PRS, that's adding value to the estate because it's being managed well, and it's creating demand, which is in turn pushing up land values. So when they're selling on future phases, because we're talking like a 20-year timescale here. So there's kind of like the 3 different parts to the development, and each one of them supports the other. And it means that we're in a very fortunate position where from day dot we've been able to think about and account for amenity at like the highest level. We've got a great working relationship with the local authorities, and we really have put sort of green space and open community spaces at the heart of the developments.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see that as well. It's for me, it's all based on the master plan really, and what you're paying into. It's the local amenities as well, and it's a site location and positioning. It doesn't have to be on your site. I mean, some section when all SIPs agreements, when you're paying into them, it's for the wider town, which benefits the site, which is great as well. But I think we are buying more and more into mixed tenure sites where there is a wider master plan, like you're saying, Georgia, where there is a sports facility on site, and you're paying a service charge towards it as an estate charge, and that benefits the residents. That increases retention, and that's what we're seeing at this point in time. But I think there's certainly on the where you've got a smaller pockets of land and it's being developed out by the single investor, shall we say. It's all dependent on returns as well, and it's what the developer wants. Do you want to get rid of 3 or 4 houses to put a basketball court on there? The answer would probably be no, it's not, because we want to invest in the houses themselves and get the returns. And I think, Gio, you've seen some of this as well, haven't you?
Yeah, and particularly going back to my previous point around the very competitive land market, you're having to squeeze the efficiency, push the unit numbers and density on the site in order to get to the pricing that allows you to be competitive. You know, we are starting to see a bit more appetite from people to incorporate, proper central amenity hubs. We're looking at something in the northeast at the moment, which is 300 plus homes, an old town hall in the sort of center of the regeneration program, where hopefully it could be some form of commercial or amenity that services the neighborhood. But I don't think we're quite there yet with a US style model with shared gardens and a swimming pool, but we're definitely getting there in terms of a desire to differentiate a build to rent product from PRS, and also create that community that we're alluding to as part of the single family neighborhood. But yeah, it comes down to construction costs, competitiveness of pricing, and what we are finding at the moment is it's probably more difficult to incorporate a significant amount of amenity within a scheme that falls outside of sort of some standard landscaping and plant work.
And going back to my previous point, it ultimately does push the rents up, and for single family housing in particular, it does on the whole, it does tend to be sort of your average sort of Joe. It's not someone that's necessarily on sky high sort of salaries. So it does still need to be attainable for sort of the local market where you're developing. So I mean, from our point of view, amenity sort of is looked into right from the very offset of looking at where we're actually building. So it's more about building in locations where you can take advantage of the local amenity, as opposed to it necessarily being all inclusive on site. So are there good local schools, are there good local gyms, and that sort of thing. And arguably I'd sort of also say that the needs and wants are slightly different for single family housing renters. I actually did have actually made me laugh, Joe, when you said that, because I actually had a neighbour once that came to me. Each neighbour wanted to knock through our walls and have a big shared garden, which I wasn't really up for. So I do think sometimes the need and what people want for single family housing is very different to obviously your build to rent apartment schemes. So it's about taking advantage of that sort of local amenity as well.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so what are the challenges then for management and design, particularly with scale? Because obviously amenity is one of them, apart from anything else, having the sort of the ability to manage that on site, and having sort of most single family build to rent housing schemes don't have a sort of an on-site presence 24/7. So what are the challenges from a management point of view, and also from a sort of a spec point of view, particularly with scale?
I'll pick up the management side in a bit on the design. I know Graham's got a lot to say on that side. Management side, I mean, look, at the heart of anything single family build to rent, because it's that widespread and there's that much of a reach, you need to be basically a master of operations. You need to have very similar processes. Doesn't matter where you are in the country. You've got to have like-minded people managing the stock and be able to diversify themselves as to how they manage things. And yeah, it all really comes back to the digitalization, really, for me. It's how you capture the data, how everybody is treated. They all need to get the same experience. And it's definitely that, for me, which is absolutely key to this, because it's not as easy as your multifamily, where it's in a dense location. You've got a concierge, someone's on hand straight away to deal with a situation or an issue. You need to be able to diversify. You need to be able to have that reach via your maintenance contractors, in-house external teams, give that consistency to the customer. And that can be very simply driven by how quick you can fix something, given certain KPIs that need to be hit. And once you start to get that, and customers start to realize, well, this brand is really good because they fixed my dishwasher in 5 days. Well, that's what gets it out there. And that is really something that impacts that customer's bubble at that point in time. So we need to make sure that we can deal with situations in an efficient way, in a cost efficient way, especially, and give them that experience that it's not an issue and it's very simple to rent where they are. I think that's key for me.
Just to expand on Luke's point, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get the defects right if you are dealing with new build properties. Because I think in this particular tenure type that we're looking at, arguably your retention, your turnover should be a bit lower. Your average tenancy length should be a bit longer. These are people who are a bit more stable. They're not so transient, moving around for work now. They're starting families. But if you are putting people into new build properties and you're not managing the defects properly, you'll never be able to repair the relationship, and you start off on such a bad foot. So really investing in a dedicated team member with excellent customer service, because really you are the middleman between the occupier and the house builder, and it's not an easy position to be in. That was a real game changer when it came to our satisfaction scores.
Yeah, totally agree. Definitely hold our partners and house builders to account within the 1 year, 2 year defects periods to make sure you're getting value for money yourself, because what you don't want to happen is as soon as it goes out of defects, there's a problem that needs to be rectified, and arguing with partners, which is never good. So
Yeah,
totally agree with you there, Georgia. Absolutely.
It also helps you control your own expenditure. If it's the house builder's fault, they need to pay for it, but if you don't find it, they never will. So helps keep costs down.
Get it on a list and get it to
Yeah.
Just on the design side, I mean, obviously, yes, there are a lot of challenges, but I think a lot of them can be managed through the design approach. We typically lean towards typologies that can offer high density. Density is difficult on single family housing, but there are lots of benefits to it. You know, it uses land more efficiently, it reduces urban sprawl, improves the local economy, improves transport, and it's easier to reduce carbon on a high density development. For delivering at scale, we apply standardization to some extent. For example, we have a standard specification, but we are careful with how we use standard house types. We take a lot of pride in the design process and tend to avoid a cookie cutter approach where we just throw a load of standard house types on a site. And we don't scrimp on size as well. You know, all the houses meet the minimum requirements of NDSS and sort of, you know, spacious and well proportioned. And we do a lot of market research as well to understand the local area and its demand. So, you know, although we're often pushing for density, we do everything from studio apartments through to 5-bedroom houses. It just depends what's needed in the area, really. I think we're even providing bungalows on some of our sites at the moment, which I think a lot of developers would typically steer away from.
I think on that side where we're talking about standardization, it does really depend on your brand and what you're offering to the customer. Within Sigma and Simple Life, we try and give consistency across the piece. That helps with our developer partners because we've got very similar, they're building everywhere for us, so they've got their own certain house types. They know our spec. And for me, on a management piece, we need to be able to manage these items and be able to, if something fails, be able to replace it like for like. Is there a longevity of that product? Even when it comes down to simple things like white goods, it's easier if all of our partners use the same white goods, so we can maintain it at a certain price and give a certain customer service level to the customer at the end to say, we can fix that in 5 days. Don't worry about it. I know how much it's going to cost. And just we try and push a little bit more on the standardization to try and meet our brand, essentially. That's what we go for.
Yeah. So I'm just conscious of time. If everyone's okay, we'll just run over slightly just to finish off these last few questions. I'm also aware that James P has also asked a question which in the Q&As, which actually I think should be covered hopefully by our next couple of questions, more on sort of the customer resident experience side, and how we can sort of make the homes appeal more to customers and also local planning authorities. So the next question was going to be about how community can be created, particularly from my point of view as marketing director. A lot of my role, I mean, we're very lucky at the moment, obviously the demand is huge, so in terms of physical marketing to actually get applications in, there's very little that we need to do other than sort of the standard site material. So a lot of my role is about creating that customer experience, and I think for me, creating community on a single family housing development, it's very difficult. We do a lot of sort of kind of road shows and events and things like that, and trying to encourage people to come out of the houses and get to know one another. But when you've got a portfolio of over sort of 65 different sites, that can become really logistically difficult to do that. It's not like you've just got 3 big buildings where you can sort of do one larger event, which arguably is a lot easier to do. So relying on tech, I think, is a really important one, which is why we've now got our own app, and I think things like forums where you can actually get that natural community sort of flourishing. So I think from my point of view, it's more about giving sort of almost a platform for the community to flourish, and I think it's also really important for it not to become too contrived and almost like forced fun. I think when it's always the landlord initiating these sort of things, it can become a bit and actually you need to be able to identify those people on your sites that are sort of willing to sort of take the lead and actually trying to put that responsibility back into the residents to kind of create their community themselves. So like we have book boxes on sites, and we actually have book guardians, and they're people that have put their hand up and said, I want a book box on our site, I'll be the one that manages it, I'll look after it. And the same with events. We're now doing a lot more events where we're sort of saying to people, it's up to you if you want to do for the King's coronation, if you want to do a street party, that's fine, we'll donate some money towards it, but essentially it's you taking charge of this. And that's where you see your forums coming into play as well, to see a lot of people saying, I want to set up a bit of a dog walking group or whatever that might be, and then you're seeing sort of people jump off the back of that. So I think we've got a role to play in it, but it's also getting that balance right. Georgia, have you got some, I'm sure you've probably got some tips on this as well.
Well, I was a nodding dog there, because you were saying so many things that I agree with and that we found to be really effective. Community engagement doesn't have to be expensive, but it does have to be authentic. And really, it's an enabling role. You will know there will be a resident who has a lot to say and sticks their head above the parapet, and grab onto that person, because they can be your greatest resource. You know, if you invite them to take on a role for sort of speaking on behalf of the community or organizing something, you can turn someone who could be a detractor into a promoter really easily. And like a really small budget, or even if there's like a space that you can offer for them to organize their own events, you're enabling them, but then stepping away and let them get on with it. And then we will also hold like an open day each year, which is just an opportunity where like the whole team's on site. Residents can come and ask us whatever questions. Because we've got these very long-term developments, we'll also provide them with updates about what's going on, which tends to be a big draw. And then ditto, they can meet their neighbours, and it often turns into like a bit of a social event once we've pulled away and left them to it.
Absolutely. Graham, did you have anything to say on that, more from sort of a planning planning and design point of view?
I'm conscious of time, but you can create community by taking a people-centric approach to design. It sounds a bit cheesy, but it's in our name. We put the place first, and I think placemaking is fundamental in our approach to urban design and master planning. We create active street frontages that feel safe and secure. Every detail matters, from the arrangement of windows to selection of materials, the color of the front door, the wayfinding across the site. It's all tied into the community feel. And I know we've mentioned shared gardens, and it's something that we've found really successful on our schemes. Everyone has their own private patio space that opens out into a shared garden, and it's maintained and managed by Place First, and they're just huge in fostering the sense of community on the site. So design can encourage that social interaction, and just having a place for the kids to play and grow safely is really important. You're on mute, Vicky.
Thank you. And finally, what does the customer experience look like? So this is probably me again, marketing director, sort of banging the drum about brand, but I feel quite passionate about the fact that, particularly as build to rent single family housing portfolios start to be sold, it's really, really important for you to maintain that build to rent label. Build to rent isn't just about, it's built to rent and then you can kind of forget about it. It is about that longevity of the customer experience, and I feel quite strongly that in order to do that, you do need to have a brand attached to it. Because it offers the platform of people knowing that they have that sense of belonging to something greater. And they also know that people in the same development, it's a lot harder. So your apartment scheme, everyone knows they're all renting, and that apartment scheme tends to be branded up anyway. Single family housing, it's not as clear. So it's making sure that it's clear that you've got a brand where people all know that they're in the same development, they've got something in common, they're renting from the same landlord. And it's almost like a platform for your brand values to play out as well. How do you communicate those sort of things if you don't have a brand to do that? Because arguably the customer journey from someone coming in that wasn't there from the offset when it was first built, arguably if you don't have a brand and all the communications are coming from different kind of companies and things like that, it just becomes a normal PRS journey. It doesn't become a build to rent experience. So that's something that I'm sort of quite passionate on. Georgia, I don't know whether you have anything to say on that part as well.
Yeah, well, to the greatest degree that I can possibly manage, our regional single family housing customers are getting the same customer journey experience as the city centre build to renters. So Grainger's invested heavily in an app and like a really slick customer journey from first viewing to moving in and throughout. And our single family housing residents are getting exactly the same service. The big difference, for obvious reasons, is that we don't have concierge, but that's not what they're looking for. That's not why they've chosen this product. They want their family home, and it's our job as professional landlords to make everything in the background as slick as possible so they can just get on with enjoying and living in their home.
Yeah, 100%. And it kind of links back to what we were talking a little bit about earlier about the tenure blind approach. And actually, people don't want a gated community necessarily with a big plastered label saying I'm in this rental development when it's single family housing. So, all of our houses are tenure blind. You wouldn't know going on site whether it's actually a homeowner, which ones are homeowners and which ones are renters. So that's quite important for us. And that's what people want, essentially.
Yeah. Just ease of dealing with issues, single points of contact, end-to-end management, very similar to multifamily, but it's just taken back a step a little bit. Just make it nice and easy for residents to crack on with their lives, really.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's all the questions we had on the list. Sorry, guys, I know we've run over quite a lot. Amanda, did you want to jump back on? Don't know if we've got any time for any questions or whether we just sort of wrap that up afterwards.
Well, we can perhaps spend 5 minutes on questions. We've had a number through. I'll just list them out in order that we receive them, and it may be that some of this has been covered. So what percentage of rent is operational costs for single family housing build to rent?
Who wants to have a go at that one?
That's a question.
What percentage of rent is operational costs for single family housing build to rent?
I'll say, between 40 and 50%. Obviously, my portfolio is very blended and it's higher on the affordable housing for obvious reasons.
Okay, then the next one is how much per unit is OPEX in single family housing based on data from operational stock?
It's certainly lower than your multifamily space. They can operate between 25 and 30. We're way under 25% on the operational side. It's published on the REIT's website if you want the exact percentage.
Yeah, sorry, I should clarify as well. I was talking about operating margin, so including overheads as well. So for gross to net, which would be our day-to-day operating costs, between 18 and 24% for the single family housing and higher for the affordable.
Yeah.
The next question was related to ESG, and that came in really before everyone moved on to ESG. So I think that's been covered. And also a question around how many units bring operational efficiency, that got answered as well. Given the low returns in single family housing, are you competing with house builders and open market sales? How are investors making the returns work?
I don't mind jumping in here. So I think in terms of the point around competing with open market sales, you are, and kind of that's been one of the big sort of, I suppose, barriers in terms of getting into the market. Obviously, now that the open market sales market is, looking less rosy, house builders are more willing to deal with ourselves, sort of PRS investors who are buying typically at a discount to what their open market sales are. So you are competing, but it's from a sort of house builder perspective, but you are also buying at a discount, which is how you sort of make the yields work for you.
I would also add that we certainly find on mixed tenure sites as well that actually the house builder quite often does see the value of it being mixed tenure and us being on there. Obviously we can get the site feeling much more lived in a lot quicker, which ultimately then actually increases their sale prices. So it kind of works hand in hand quite well when we're on a mixed tenure site.
Sorry, I'm ploughing through these, but the next question, how can single family housing best demonstrate additionality of homes in order to appeal to customers and local planning authorities?
Yeah, I think we answered a little bit there about the resident experience. Anyone want to take the local planning authorities? I mean, from our point of view, it goes back to the fact that we can obviously rent at a rate of knots compared to the number of sales, so we can get the houses therefore built a lot quicker, and then communities are basically created extremely quickly compared to your open market sale, and we are obviously fulfilling that housing need. So yeah,
there's also an argument that this type of product can support like a good labour market in a city as well, or in an urban area. If people are buying, they're locking themselves into an area, but having like a really well managed portfolio of residential property that's rented can allow people to move to an area for work more easily. That's an argument that has had some success for local authorities.
I think also how it's kept in the management of it. Like we were saying earlier about it being tenure blind, the only thing that I would say is sometimes when you go on the mixed schemes, you can actually see, once it's obviously fully complete and you've got people living in there, your open market sale, it's up to them how they maintain the road frontage and the street scene and things like that, and local area, being attractive. But actually we maintain all of our front gardens and the street scene for our residents, so you can actually tell that ours is actually better kept in most circumstances once the site is fully complete.
Yeah, definitely better curb appeal, I'd say, with a managed frontage.
Okay, I think this probably be the last question. We just had a couple that came in on technology. How can technology be leveraged to manage a geographically spread out portfolio? And there was another point here about using technology platforms to enable residents to view energy usage. So any comments on technology?
I can pick up the one about measuring energy data. That's certainly something that we're looking at implementing on a bit of a pilot scheme to start with. It's quite tricky to determine how you capture and analyze the data. I think you have to be careful that you're not coming across too Big Brother-esque in looking at how residents are using their energy. But there's some fantastic technologies out there that don't just capture energy usage, but also how much energy you're generating through your renewables. It can measure air quality, humidity, which is obviously a really important topic at the moment with concerns over damp and mold. So yeah, there are some really exciting technologies that we're looking to implement in due course. We're just trying to understand the best way of doing so through a bit of a pilot scheme.
And of course, we are continuously looking to get leaner and ever more efficient. And so we are leaning on technology and apps, etc. So the vast majority of our residents now will just raise a repair via an app, and they'll get their updates about the repair progressing through the app, etc. So that's great, but there will always be a limit on what technology can really do in property management, because part of this professional landlord experience is actually dealing with a human being, and sometimes tech can't do that for us. So don't forget to get out there and meet your residents face to face, because that's really valuable.
Absolutely, I back that. Needs to happen.
I think that's it for the questions then. So back to you, Vicky, perhaps for the close.
Okay, brilliant. I've got much more to say other than thank you very much for everyone joining. Thank you for all of our panelists. I think it's been a long but great discussion, and hopefully we covered quite a lot of topics there for everyone. If anyone does have any further questions, then obviously feel free to contact us personally or through the UKAA.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone, and goodbye.